Hi everyone, so today we're going to be talking about shaking a minnow from the source. What happens when we take the population of California and we move them all into the state of Maine? That's how you get the country of South Korea. So in these conditions, you can imagine that there's a lot. We're not talking about a pressured body of water, we're talking about a pressured country. And under these high pressure situations, we really go to shaking a minnow or mid-strolling. But before we get into the mid-stroll, I just want to talk about myself. I am not a pro. I'm just a guy who fishes. I'm originally from South Korea, so grew up over there. Was always the kid that had a fishing rod in my hand and always fishing. But now that I'm back here in the US, some of you may know me as hobbyist fishing. I teach online fishing tips about bass fishing to folks out here, but also I'm selling Aros baits at Boost 309. So bridging that gap between Korean, Japanese, and Asian bass fishing was here in the US. So when we talk about mid-strolling, why does pressure create the mid-stroll? There's two things to know about bass that are pressured. One, bass get really educated. So they've seen every single bait a million times. They've seen a jerk bait, they've seen a paddle tail. Even a paddle tail can get too much action for really pressured bass. But also, when bass get really pressured, they start suspending. So that's middle of the water column, middle of your body of water, middle of your body of lake, which makes it really hard to go after these bass, but also catch them, which is why the mid-stroll is so effective. The mid-stroll is a slow slackline technique targeting these middle of the water column bass that we can fish when they're very finicky. But also, this is like the perfect time to talk about a mid-stroll, because right now, as we go into the spring, when that water hasn't fully warmed up yet, so it's still cold, the bass are willing to eat, but they don't want to chase. That slow rolling action is perfect for your mid-stroll. So now let's talk about a little bit about what a mid-stroll is and what it is not from someone who was raised around it. So on the video, this is a mid-stroll. The mid-stroll is a slackline technique where all we're trying to do is manipulate our slack line on our rod to get our bait to roll really nicely. We don't want the bait to jump up. We don't want the bait to dive down. We don't want it going left to right. All it is a really nice left to right roll. And a mid-stroll is not a paddle tail, where it may seem very similar. The biggest difference here is a mid-stroll, we make our action from manipulating our slack line. The paddle tail gets its action from our reel. That reeling action is actually what is giving that paddle tail its action. And it is also not a Demiki rig. I know a lot of folks use that word with mid-strolling or hover strolling. The Demiki rig is really not made for mid-strolling. It's actually designed for vertical fishing. So when you're on top of bass on your electronics, you can video game fish them. The Demiki rig is designed more like an ice fishing jig than it is a mid-strolling jig. So now that we talked about what it is, my favorite part, let's talk about fishing gear. Does anyone know what that bait is? So that's a very old school bait. That's a Berkeley Pro Twitch Series minnow. And the reason why I bring that up is because when I learned how to mid-stroll in Korea, it was never for bass. It was actually for stocked rainbow trout. And this was my setup. Literally, this is a ultralight trout fishing rod with a 1,000 size reel, 4-pound test fluorocarbon, and I was fishing a 1/64 ounce jig head to the Berkeley Twitch minnow. But as I became more of a bass fisherman and less of a trout fisherman, and also if you catch a 10-pound bass on this rig, which you will do, you don't want to be on ultralight gear. So we've beefed things up. So now what we go to, this is my Sandman series from Witch Doctor Tackle. It's a 7.2 medium light fast action rod. A few things that we've upgraded here. One, of course, we go to a heavier rod. So instead of ultralight, medium light. Because we're going to be fishing light jig heads with light baits, I don't recommend going heavier than that. And then when it comes to the length of the rod, I use a 7'2". Generally, plus minus a few inches off of 7 inches is a good middle ground. The problem is if we go too long on a rod, say 7'4", 7'6", 8 foot, to shake that rod tip consistently and have a nice repeatable action becomes really hard. It's really hard to control a tip from at a long distance. However, while it is easier to go to a a shorter rod to shake that bait, you start to lose casting distance. You know, we're casting these light jigs. We want to get those baits out. We want the bass to see them. So we need to kind of find the right middle balance. So 7 foot plus minus a few inches, depending on what you're comfortable. Then for the taper of our rod, we're going extra fast or fast action. Again, going back to that shaking of our rod tip, if our rod has too much action, like my old trout rod does, when I shake this rod tip, it just goes all over the place. In order to get that nice controlled action, we want to go fast to extra fast. And if you can find an extra fast action rod tip, I recommend the extra fast just because it's going to help you feel those smaller bites that you get on the mid-stroll. For your reel, you can really use anything you want. I use a Vanford 2500 size. You can do this on a 3000 plus rod. You can go to a 10,000 size reel. But the problem is once we go past 3000, it gets really heavy. And when we're shaking this thing all day, you don't want to shake a heavy reel. And also braid can be expensive. So to fill a 4000 size spool will cost a lot of money. And speaking of line, I use a 12-pound test braid. So when we talk about braid, this is a 6-pound test equivalent diameter to fluorocarbon. So it says 12-pound test on the box, but different braid companies, different types of braid will have different breaking strength. But you want to find as thin of a braid as possible, because if you go too thick on your braid, you're going to actually start to impede the action of the mid-stroll. And then I also go to a 4 to 6-pound test fluorocarbon leader. And then I just showed 2 spinning rods. The question I get a lot is, can you use a bait casting rod? Yes and no. While it is possible to fish a mid-stroll on a bait caster, because we're fishing this on slack line, as you reel in that bait caster on slack line, your spool is not going to be laid out nicely, and the next time you go to cast, you're going to backlash. And then how many of you know these 2 baits? And how many of you think you need these 2 baits to actually mid-stroll? That's a depth Sakamata shad, which I know a lot of people have bought a lot of them today for a lot of money. And that's also a Raid fish roller. While these are nice soft plastics, you actually don't need to. Like I said, I learned how to mid-stroll on a Berkeley Pro Series twitch bait. So when it comes to selecting a bait for mid-strolling, you can choose whichever kind of soft plastic you like, as long as they meet a few different criteria. So first, of course, we're looking for a baitfish profile. So as long as your soft plastic looks like a baitfish, we're good to go there. For the tail, we want a straight tail, nothing with a paddle tail. I personally enjoy a pintail bait, but if it has a fork in the tail, that's fine. It just, as long as it's not too wide, so it doesn't get in the way of the rolling action. And then finally, the most important part is when you look at that soft plastic head on, you should have a flattish top and then a rounded belly. That shape of that bait really helps create that nice rolling action out of your soft plastic. So again, if we take all those things into account, that's why the Berkeley Pro Series twitch bait actually works for this. And then for the jig heads, just a kind of a rule of thumb, you can play around with these. You can use a range roller jig head, which is really nice, but not 100% necessary. You can use just a normal ball head jig for this. And for the weights of our jig heads, I'm going to recommend 1/32, 1/16. Lighter is better here. 1/8 I will recommend in very few specific situations. When I talk about how we fish this bait, if you go too heavy of a bait, you actually are going to have to fish this bait too quickly to make it an effective mid-stroll. So keeping it 1/16 to 1/32 really helps there. And then a little rule of thumb, you can play around with these numbers as well. A 3-inch soft plastic will take a number 2 size jig head. A 4-inch will take a number 1. A 5-inch will take a 1/0 or 2/0. And then when we talk about 5 inches and plus, 3/0. Plus, minus. So let's talk about actually the physics of rolling a soft plastic. So the whole point here is we're trying to get an unstable point of equilibrium. And the easiest way for me to explain this is if I take my rod and my reel and I want to balance this on my finger, when that reel is pointed downwards, this thing will always stay balanced with the reel downwards. However, if I take that weight, if I take my reel and put it on top of the rod and try to balance it, it's going to want to roll over. It becomes really hard to balance it on my finger, perfectly standing still. And that's the exact thing that we're trying to achieve with our mid-strolls and our soft plastic. So if that's our soft plastic, the head of, like, if we're looking at our soft plastic, most of the times we're putting our hook point right through that star on the bait. But we want to actually bring that hook point as high up in that soft plastic as possible. The higher we can get that hook point into our soft plastic, the more of a roll we're going to get. So kind of explaining this as on our normal soft plastic, this is why the Damiki head doesn't work, because as you can see, the Damiki head puts all of its weight underneath the soft plastic. It makes it very stable. It's not going to roll, but it'll sit there really nicely. So we won't use one of those. So we have our jig head, not through the center. We want to, one, bring that jig head as high up in that soft plastic as possible. And then two, if your soft plastic allows it, is to actually try to hook that jig head on top of our soft plastic, on the forehead of that bait. So now that we know what baits we can use or how we use our jig heads, if we get that set up, we can get most soft plastics to roll. So we know the gear, we know the rod, we know the baits, we know the jig heads. So it's time to learn how to mid-stroll. The first thing I'm going to say, it's a lot of practice. It's one of those techniques that it's going to take a long time to really nail, but once you do, it will pay dividends. So the first thing is actually, even before we start shaking our minnow, is taking your soft plastic and your jig, casting it out. If you have a pool, perfect. If you don't, clear body of water in the shallow, cast that bait out there. And we want to find the speed at which we have to reel that bait to give it a consistent depth. It shouldn't be sinking, it shouldn't be rising, learning that speed. But the hard part here is making sure we're not just reeling that in on tight line. It has to have a little slack. So as you're trying to practice, you'll find that the lighter your jig head, the easier it is to bring that jig head right through the water, but also with a little bit of slack in your line. And then once we get there, then we can start shaking. So we call it shaking a minnow or a mid-stroll, but we're not shaking like the old Alabama swim jig guys, right? We're not doing one of these. It's not shaking. The way that I was taught the mid-stroll is actually, this is why a spinning rod is really nice for this, is we're gonna choke up on our rod. We're gonna put our index finger on top of that rod spine, and all we're gonna do is pushing my index finger down. All I want to get is a bounce off the back of my elbow. So the butt of my rod needs to bounce off the back of my elbow. It's a really light shaking action. And let's see how we're going to teach this. So the way that I also practice to do this is this will be really great to do at home right now while we're still frozen. So you're going to put your jig head on there with your soft plastic. You're going to cast this out. You can do this inside your house. You can do this while you're sitting on your sofa. So you're going to sit on your sofa or stand around. You're going to put your bait on the ground. And all we're looking here is with a little bit of slack in my line. I am not trying to shake that bait. I am shaking that slack. And I don't want that bait to rise. I don't want it to sink. Oh, that's a bad one actually. By shaking our slack, all I want to do, all I want to get is that bait rolling left to right. You can see that jig head going left and right. That's the amount of shaking that you need. So right now, while we're at home, before the ices melt, while you got nothing else to do, just practice that shaking. And you'll start to realize it's a very light shaking action. You're shaking your line, you're not shaking that bait. Whoa! I'm so sorry, I'll buy you new coffee after this. But with all those things, with the jig heads, with the practice, with the speed, I'm so sorry about that. You'll get this kind of nice rolling action. And it does take a lot of practice, and it will get there. And then few plus things, some extra things about mid-strolling. One, it's great for bank angling. You see a lot of pros doing this with electronics. Yes, it works really great and electronics are fun, but as a bank angler, this is a really great technique to just have in your pocket. Use it at all your ponds. You'll catch a lot of fish. And then for folks with electronics on boats, there's a thing called power mid-strolling. So we're going up to 5, 6, 7-inch Sakamata sheds, bigger soft plastics. But that's the one time we can go to that 1/8 ounce, use a bait caster, use a medium heavy, maybe a heavy rod. You can just bump up all the different parts of our mid-strolling rig. And then finally, shaking to the side. I get this question sometimes online. You'll see pros shaking like this on their boat to the side. The only thing that is that because when you're fishing braid and wind, if the wind is blowing a lot, if you're shaking like this, your braid is gonna be blowing everywhere. So you just shake to the side to keep that line out of the wind. Same thing, but it's a great thing to understand and know. But any questions? What?
Medium light.
Medium light.
Water action.
No, faster, extra fast. So faster, better. So faster is better. So faster tip, extra fast, fast. The power of the rod, medium light is fine. I use a medium light. You can use a light, you can use an ultralight. I learned how to do it on ultralight, but fast to extra fast. Sorry?
It's not a lot of slack.
No, you gotta find that speed to keep just a little bit of slack. You just need enough slack to shake it. Yep. Length of rod? For the length of it, plus minus a few inches on 7 feet. So 6'10" is great. Like 6'6" is good too, especially if you need it to be able to control it. If you go any shorter, you start losing casting distance. But if you're not worried about the casting distance, shorter is actually a lot easier to learn on. Going past 7 foot, 7'2" is once you get a lot more practice on that shake. Yep. 6'9"? 6'9" is great. Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm at booth 309. I have some great mid-strolling baits if you want to buy some. You can use whatever you like, but I am selling a few. Thank you.
Can I see the setup?
Yeah, of course. I'm so sorry about that. Can I get you a new? Oh, is it your coffee?
Yeah.
Oh, it's no one's coffee? Okay, goodness. I was like, I thought I knocked someone's coffee over. I'm so sorry about that.
So I noticed on this jig head.
So that's a range roller jig head.
Yeah.
So the big thing, if you look here, you can pull that plastic off of it. So the big thing is the way they make that jig, it brings that weight higher up.
Yeah.
Which is really nice for rolling. But if you had a normal ball head jig where the weight's a little lower, especially when you can get that hook in higher, it doesn't really matter.
Why the hook high?
Sorry?
Why the hook high?
So the weight, see how even in my hand, it wants to fall over to one side. So that falling over plus you're shaking it is what brings it back and forth. Yeah. Yeah, and lighter is better always. Even if you use a bigger soft plastic, going to a light as a jig as possible really slows this down. The one thing that drives me crazy is like people doing this like 1/8 ounce. 1/8 ounce, it doesn't sound heavy, but in water, it's just falling straight down. You want something that takes a little while to get there, especially from the bank. Yeah, exactly. But a Ned's fish on the bottom, we don't need to fish the bottom, so. Yeah, but the range rollers are really well made. They're nice and thin hooks too. And then also, really random thing, but when you buy your ball head jigs, you also want to find a jig head that has a wire keeper. So some of them have that molded lead on around it. That's adding more weight to the middle of that bait. That's why these hooks are so well made for this, is that there's very little weight down here. It's just that wire holding your bait in place.
Just enough to fall around.
Yeah. If you have too thick of a weighted hook there, you're just bringing that weight down. So.
And when you're saying like the actual weight, it's like you were saying 1/32
and 1/60.
and you said like what 1/8 is like
as
The
as
highest.
heavy as I'll go.
Yeah.
And 1/8 is really like if I'm on a boat and I'm fishing 20 foot of water with electronics, with a 5, 6, 7 inch soft plastic.
Yeah.
That's as heavy as I'm gonna go.
And when you're feeding the hook through,
Yeah.
you always go like it's not on an angle. It's
Yeah,
just-
it's for the mid-stroll center. Like I think I talked about a few people about like certain soft plastics going on an angle.
Yeah.
But for the mid-stroll center is always great.
and that way it always ensures that it's gonna have that action.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry to
It's
get off,
yeah.
but like, what baits would you do at night?
There's the aqua gill that like the G crack stuff, like yeah, like something like that. So you know how you put your hook point like centered, put it a little bit off to the side, and it'll fall on an angle and do a death spiral down.
Like in the,
Yeah.
the nail weight with
Yeah.
like nose dive.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're looking for a rod,
Cool though. I've never heard of midstrolling before.
yeah. So they call it shaking a minnow. The name at least in Korea is mid-strolling. They say hover minnow, the Mickey rig.
Yeah.
Those don't. The Mickey rig really, it drives me crazy.
Something completely different.
Yeah.
Some of the bass
What
pros
is
were
the
talking.
The Damiki rig is a jig and it has that weight on the bottom, and it literally is an ice fishing jig for bass. So you can just drop it down on electronics and you just sit there and just do this. Vertically. It's a vertical fishing technique, but it's not designed for movement and rolling.
So just sit there on the boat for 7 hours and just
Yeah. When you see the bass underneath you on electronics, you just sit on top of them doing this.
When I know you're saying that you're originally from South Korea.
Yeah.
When they're mentioning, is it only trout that they're fishing for there?
No, they do it for bass now.
Okay.
It's just how I learned it.
Yeah.
I was at these like trout ponds, and like these trout have seen everything. We were fishing. Usually, you're using this, like tiny micro spoons for trout.
Yeah.
But the thing is these are man-made ponds where they stock these trout, and I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with 20 other dudes around this pond,
pressure.
and these poor trout have been caught multiple times in a day. So at a certain point, they'll stop hitting spoons. So then you go to the mid-stroll, and some older guy was like, "You should try this."
So it's not catch and keep, and they keep restocking.
You don't want to catch and keep any. That's gross. They're really gross after. They get that skin disease when people don't handle them properly, and you like pull up a trout and it's like it lost half of its face.
With your hand.
Yeah, no one does. We just use nets.
I've trout fished my whole life. That's how I started. And when people handle trout so hard, I'm like, I'm gonna fight you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in Korea it's fun. You should, if you're ever in Asia or Japan, it's called area trout.
Yeah.
It's like its whole own thing on trout fishing.
Yeah.
Really fun. You pay like $15 for the day, and you just fish all day.
So,
They keep the ponds from freezing. Yeah, of course.
definitely cheaper. We just
If you come over to my booth in a bit, 309, I have a few more rods if you want to take a look at them. I work with these guys, Witch Doctor. They make really great rods. But yeah,
Plastic is that? Is that a plastisol?
no, just a normal saw plastic.
A plastisol bait?
I think so.
man, thanks.
No worries. Thanks for coming around. Thanks for sticking around.
Yeah, it's very. I like learning new techniques.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what?
I'm interested in
Yeah.
that for like.
Can I see the spoon?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a really fun technique. It takes some practice. It's like with Asian bass fishing, it's so technical, much more than here.
What brand is that?
I don't remember. I honestly, it's had so long, but so technical. And this is one of the things that's coming now to the U.S., which is very exciting. I'm like,
I'm trying to figure out if we can the physics behind that works with bigger baits for like strike.
What pound line are you?
I'm sure. Like if you take the Lunker City finesse, the finesse, they make the sluggo, but they have the sluggo as the tail.
Yeah.
I'm sure if you do the same thing, it would work.
I'm thinking about like maybe cutting the tail off some of my flukes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you can just do it with the fluke. We use flukes all the time, like a zoom fluke,
Yeah.
like the super fluke. You can do it as a fluke. The only thing I would be worried about is trying to work through like big waves. Like trying to shake that through waves can get a little annoying.
I'm thinking about a specific situation where I fish, where I'm in a river where it's
Oh my goodness, no worries.
and getting the lazy fish. Like
Yeah, I mean that could work. That definitely could work.
you know,
Yeah, I
'Cause
mean,
we know they're there. They're just lazy.
yeah, if you have a pool, if you have something, because especially if it's going to be for striper, if you're bumping up those weights, probably if you can find a jig hook that's light enough and thin, like light enough but long enough for those soft plastics, it could work really well. It's just got to play around with it. I mean, like I said, if you have a pool or access to like a clear body of water in the shallows, they can really watch that bait. It helps a lot, and just constantly doing it.
I like the concept. Thank you for.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
Actually 3. How long is your leader?
It depends. That's maybe like 3 feet right now.
3 feet?
Like usually when I tie my leaders, I just take the leader that I'm using. I do a full arm to arm open. This is probably because I fished it for a while and it's like I've cut and retied baits onto it. It's a shorter, but depending on the longer and shorter stuff, it changes.
What connecting knot are you using? Are you using like Palomar or what?
Surgeon's knot.
Surgeon's knot. What is that?
So it's like all you literally do is you take your leader, you take your braid or your main line, you make a loop with both of them doubled over,
And you tie it.
and you just you just like a uni knot, run both of them through it.
Yeah.
It's super easy to tie,
Oh,
but for like
I know what you mean.
it's like look it up, surgeon's knot.
Yeah.
So it's like it's not the thinnest knot, so like, but for like thin braid, thin fluorocarbon like this, it's perfect.